Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'm joined today with Michael Koretzky, the Regional Director for the Society of Professional Journalists. Or are you still a Regional Director?
I still am. It's, there's 12 regions. I'm Region 3. It's all bureaucratic, but I'm the Senior Regional Coordinator. I've been doing it longer than anyone else.
All right. Well, hey, congratulations. That's cool.
Not really. It doesn't come with any groupies or, drugs or hotel rooms. It's not very glamorous.
I see. You do get to host conferences, which we're going to be playing muted in the background, though. The SPJ Airplay morning panel. It's available on YouTube if you haven't seen it already. This was Michael Koretzky's brainchild here. We're going to get, I'm sure, into like how this came to be in a minute. But I'll play this muted. If you want to see the full thing, I'll post a link in the description. But anyway, how you doing today, Michael?
I'm good. This is interesting because I haven't really thought about this until you reached out to me. So it's interesting all these years later what I remember about this, and it'll be interesting to see how those memories jive with yours.
Definitely, definitely. Now, we were both engaged with GamerGate, but in very different capacities. I was obviously more of an activist and kind of like a dumb kid, but sometimes made really good arguments too. I won't shoot myself down too much. But I was an activist. You were a journalist who was hosting SPJ Airplay and wanted to explore what the heck this was.
Yeah, I was a little naive about that. I thought, oh, you know what? I'll spend a couple days doing this.
Oh no. I might be a bit naive too. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna wrap this project up within a couple months, get all the interviews done in 2 months, maybe a few more months for editing, for the editing the transcripts down for book form. Am I way misguided on this?
I have never been. I've been involved in investigative journalism before that takes a lot longer than you think. I have never been involved in anything that was as big a time suck as Gamergate in my entire life. Not marriage, not work, nothing.
Yeah, well, don't feel too bad because it sucked away too many hours of my life too.
Well,
But
I don't really, I didn't say I didn't enjoy it, but it was just like, it's very humbling because they thought, well, how hard could this be? And it's like renovating a bathroom. It's like, oh, Jesus, there's more to fix.
now, please correct me if I have the timeline wrong here, but I believe this came about because the Society of Professional Journalists created a hashtag for Ethics Week. And a bunch of Gamergate people said, hey, we really care about ethics. Why don't you talk to us?
No, well, close. So what happened is SPJ has an ethics week, which is about as exciting as the American Dental Society having a flossing week. So, I mean, journalists are supposed to be ethical, but it's really, it's not sexy and fun. So they have this hashtag, usually goes unnoticed. I was serving on the national board of directors at the time, and the hashtag got bombed by a bunch of just weird shit using the Gamergate hashtag. And it was, well, the ones I remember most vividly were very well drawn, like comic book images of men dressed as Nazis peeing on other men and then filleting each other. And that freaked out some of the other more Midwestern conservative journalists on the board. And what does it have to do with ethics? And they said, let's just have nothing to do with it. They shut down the hashtag and there was no more ethics week. And I was like, well, I'm intrigued, journalistically quizzical. Like, let's act. I want to follow up with this. So I just did it on my own because no one else wanted to. I didn't know what Gamergate was. I actually looked up the hashtag and tried to read some other journalism on it. Found there was very scarce journalism, lots of opinion columns, which is one kind of journalism, but like that's like eating chocolate chip cookies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's not. You need a balanced diet. So as I looked into it, the reason I actually got sucked into it was that as I was looking into it, I read a couple of columns, opinion pieces that said everyone involved in Gamergate is a misogynist, racist, asshole, or whatever negative stereotype there was. Everyone is that way. And as a journalist, when I see the word everyone or hear the term all the time or hear about everyone on the right or everyone on the left, my antenna goes up because it's really easy to journalistically disprove that. All I got to do is find one. So that's why I started looking into it, just because it didn't seem to have any nuance. And when there is no nuance, that's the time that journalists can do their best work.
Well,
Doesn't mean they do that best work, but it means they could do their best work.
You went looking for the nuance. What did you find?
No nuance. Like, just, I think I said this even back then, that it was really weird that in GamerGate, if you pissed off the people in GamerGate, they would just bombard you with, just screeds and opuses and manifestos and research. It's like all this stuff. And the anti-GamerGate people, they would block you. So at a certain point, as the further down this road I got, I was only talking to one side because the other side wouldn't talk, which was akin to trying to interview, universities or politicians. They just sometimes just refuse to comment. So by default, I ended up talking more to GamerGate people. And I made this mistake. I remember Oliver Campbell had a stream, and he said, well, would you, and he was complaining about journalists like not listening. And I said, well, tell you what, I will go on your stream and I'll answer every goddamn question for as long as it takes. It took 6 hours. I was on his stream, and I think it's still posted somewhere. I was on that stream from 6 o'clock to midnight, answering every goddamn question. And at the end, he's like, do you want to come back next week? I'm like, more? So one reason we did Airplay was just to have an event in person under a theory, which I don't know is accurate, was there's all this trolling going on. No one knows who's doing it. It's really easy to troll online, and it's really hard to troll in person. And I think I said at the time that if they're going to try to troll us at Airplay, I guess they would show up wearing a paper bag over their head and peeing on somebody. But like, it's not going to have the same effect, It's like, who's that asshole peeing on another guy? Like, just have security escort them out. So at least for that, whatever else you can say about SPJ Airplay, at least it did cut through that level of bullshit.
Yeah, and they did, I guess, find some way to troll you still, didn't they, in real life?
No, you talking about the bomb threat?
Yeah.
That has to be the dumbest troll, the laziest troll ever, because they waited until like there's only an hour left anyway to call in the bomb threat. And they did it when Milo Yiannopoulos wouldn't shut the fuck up. So it was perfect, because the only way to shut up Milo Yiannopoulos is with a bomb threat.
Well, I did get a question from an anti-GamerGate person. The video, if you're watching the video, it might pause for a second, because anytime I alt tab, it'll pause the video. But I got a couple questions from an anti-GamerGate person, and one of them was about Milo. Were there any concerns over inviting Milo Yiannopoulos, someone who is widely considered a right-wing provocateur, to the event? Do you believe that his involvement hurt the perception of the event as a serious discussion? And that's not from me, that's from the anti-GamerGate person, who's in the chat, by the way.
I don't know. They might be right, but what's important to note is I didn't pick them. The one thing I found interesting about the more sane GamerGate people was just how legalistic they are. They're like, they would all be really great lawyers, because and I get the complaint, because I at the base of this, there's a truth that the gaming press didn't do a particularly bang up job. But to organize this, there was a legitimate concern from GamerGate side. And again, anti-GamerGate just refused to come or talk to me. or they would block me even before I even reached out to them. So I guess I was on that block list or whatever. But the GamerGate crowd was, we don't want you, an idiot, picking the panelists. And I said, you're right. Journalists are not the people to be doing that. You guys will pick who will represent you, and I'll try to get the anti-GamerGate people to pick who will represent them. But then it became an issue. Well, who in the GamerGate audience is going to do the picking? Because the big problem with this whole thing journalistically and caused most of these problems is there's no membership card. In SPJ, you pay some dues and you get a number. And that's how you're a member of SPJ. If you're a mainstream journalist, you work at a mainstream outlet, you have an author page, and you know who that is. No one could tell me who was who in GamerGate. So I had to pick a panel to pick the panel. That was controversial. So then I advertised, well, who should be on this panel to pick the panel? Some GamerGate people had contacted me that have a panel to pick the panel to pick the panel. I was like, that's just too navel gazing and meta for me. So I said, well, look, I'm going to pick the people based on who I talk to. So like Oliver Campbell and some other people. Alum Bakari was one of the more rational Breitbart people I talked to. So they had a panel, and then and one thing I admired about the GamerGate side is the level of transparency. Journalists highly value transparency. So the panel to pick the panel were all live streamed and recorded and commented on and chewed over. So they picked Milo Yiannopoulos. I thought that was kind of a weird play. Like, if you are trying to make your argument, why him? And I think the problem is, and it was then and still might be now with similar online movements, is I kept trying to tell both sides that this event is not for either side. Like, you're not going to convince anyone pro or anti-GamerGate at this point, because by the time I got involved, the trenches were dug, right? There ain't going to be any peace until there's a lot more bloodshed. I'm not going to change that. You are going to participate in SPJ Airplay for everyone else. Remember, Airplay happened during a journalism conference in Miami. So there were, in the other building next door, there were classrooms. It was a center, a historic center, and had classrooms and had the theater. We were in the theater. And then there were sessions going on about data journalism, how to report this, how to report that. And a lot of those people came over for parts of Airplay. And the idea was to talk to them. And that's why I think the funniest moment of the whole thing was in the very beginning, and you already showed it, where I had this woman from Atlanta, a journalist from Atlanta, Sharon Dunton. She stood up, and I dragged her over, and I said, to the morning panel, to the GamerGate, 3 people on the panel. This is Sharon Dunton. She's an award-winning journalist in Georgia. She's a mom. She has no idea what this is. She was here for the journalism conference. Explain GamerGate to her. 3 people couldn't do it. And because I would turn to her and say, do you understand that? And she's like, I'm trying. Like, is it, so it's a hashtag thing? Like, and that was the kickoff of the whole thing. If you can't explain it to average people who know nothing about it, it's not their fault.
Well, that's the job of a journalist, though, is to try and figure it out. And I think that look, I wrote a book on it. People did serious. Well, okay. Do you want me to try and give you a definition, I guess, on the fly?
I would love that. And the definition, as I told Oliver Campbell, can't take 6 hours.
Well, if a journalist can't spend 6 hours doing research, they shouldn't be a journalist.
No, that's true. They can they can spend a lot more time than that. The problem is that, and I remember saying this multiple times during the heat of the moment, that journalists have a bunch of stories they can do because there's no shortage of good news, corruption, feature, human drama to cover. Journalists if a journalist tells you like, dude, I got nothing to write about, they aren't a very good journalist. There's usually a long list of things you want to get to, and the stress of your job is knowing you're never going to get to every good story. So you have to choose. And the whole thing about Gamergate I was trying to distill was tell me the elevator pitch. Sell me on why this story should be covered. What is it about? And the problem, I already just told you, like when I ran against the Gamergate crowd, they were very legalistic, is that any attempt to sum it up, any summary is going to obviously leave out a lot of details and nuance, but it gets you started, right? It's like a movie trailer. It's not the whole freaking movie, but it's like, oh, I want to see that movie. And then the movie unfurls as you go and explains as you go. Gamergate crowd couldn't even agree on a summary because the summary was going to leave out some detail that they thought was important to them. And I'm like, it's not about you. You have to sum it up for someone else, even if it doesn't get everything across. That's how you suck them into the story, and then they want to learn more. But I had either it was my fault or whatever. But with a significant portion of the Gamergate crowd, I could never get that point across. And I tried different tactics to do that, and it just never worked with some of them.
I guess on the fly. Again, I didn't prepare for this, so I'm winging it. Different people will have different definitions, but I think the two main components of Gamergate were ethics in games journalism and artistic freedom for game developers and artists. Though some people would later on try to adopt a generalized culture war attitude and try and put that in there as well. And also some people had other ideas. There were small niche factions that had ideas like, oh, well, this should be about combating loot boxes and microtransactions and these other industry practices that we don't like. But that was a pretty small faction. I think that for the most part, everybody either cared about ethics or creative freedom, or later on, for better or worse, some people were culture warriors. And I think that the reason it's difficult and you have like all these things thrown together is because the people that were attacking Gamergate, including the games journalists themselves in some cases, were all kind of involved in most of these different aspects, right? The games journalists were in some cases corrupt. Not always. Not all games journalists were corrupt, but some were corrupt. And they were also like bought into this weird social justice ideology, which is like fine. They have the right to their opinion, of course. But like that ideology would also lead them to be like, you need to take this out of the video game. It's sexist. You're causing real world harm in society by having this in there. We're going to get me and our 5,000 followers on Twitter to all send emails and tweets at the developer to demand that this be removed. So the same people who were opposed to us like also had like this weird conflagration of different ideas. And that's why it merged together into this weird clusterfuck.
But that's their look. That's their right. If they want to, if Arnita Sarkeesian wants to trash game or the characters in games, that's her right. She can go on her stream, she can do it, and you can post a video deconstructing why she's full of shit. That's not the issue to me. If they want to trash, if they want to declare an end of gaming as we know it, that's their freedom of speech. It's a private entity, right? Their media outlet, they own it, they run it. Start your own media outlet. Hell, shit, a lot of Gamergate people did, and I thought that was great. And then the anti-Gamergate crowd was like, those fuckers are lying. Well, that's their freedom of speech. Jesus Christ. Here's what pissed me off was there were cases. I think at Airplay probably the most important lesson may not be the one that resonates with the Gamergate crowd, but it does with the journalism crowd, is you had two journalists at that thing that are pretty notable and respectable. Lynn Walsh was the incoming president of National SPJ, and LaForm works at the Poynter Institute, which is like a continuing education place for good journalists. Bad journalists don't go there, obviously. And they both agreed that there were some cases that were presented by the Gamergate audience, and we didn't take your word for it. We actually looked that shit up, where you had gaming journalists hanging out with or dating game developers and not disclosing. You can do almost anything as long as you disclose it, but otherwise, it's like gaming journalism at the time of Gamergate was about as shitty as music journalism was in the 1960s, when music journalists would try to sleep with the lead singer of a band by writing about them. Like that's not ethical. That's bullshit. So what pissed me off had nothing to do with the opinions. To this day, I work with someone at my job who just hates Arnita Sarkeesian, and we still talk about gaming just because of all this Gamergate stuff, and it just kind of becomes an office conversation whenever we run across each other. And he hates her so much. He talks about the Unreal Engine and the whole thing, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, that's her opinion, man. Don't watch her, or do your own thing. I have no problem with anybody saying the Gamergate is shit or whatever. What I have a problem with is when not their opinion, is when they try to write things that aren't opinion. That's where they fucked up.